Welcome to the car seat. It's a great pleasure to introduce Anand Menon, who is Professor at King's College, but also Director of the ESRC initiative, Britain in a Changing Europe. And we are speaking about how regulation is affected by Brexit. Anand, so welcome to the car seat. How do you think are regulators impacted by Brexit?
Well, in any number of ways. I mean, two to start off with. One is uncertainty, because no one knows what the regulatory framework will be when we leave, and the government is being spectacularly unclear. So on substance, there's an immediate question. But the second issue, I think, is resource. That is to say, a lot of regulatory functions are done by or shared with the EU. And the question arises as to whether the state will be willing to dip its hand into its pocket and make up for those numbers when we finally leave. Because there are a lot of regulatory functions we're going to have to take over. And that's going to be quite expensive.
And are there any indications about the direction of regulatory travel? I mean, some seem to dream of a low regulation world. Other people seem to dream of a nicely protectionist regulatory world. Is there any, or are we living in multiple worlds of future regulation?
Well, we're living in a fantastically unclear world where you get mixed messages all the time. And of course, one of the features of this Brexit debate is every statement or half statement is pounced on by the press as a show of intent for long-term policy, and when it's nothing of the sort. And basically, all we know is Theresa May has said the social and employment legislation that we put on the books will remain as long as she's Prime Minister, while some of her other ministers are saying, well, actually, this is a great opportunity. Michael Gove, who isn't a minister now, but is still quite prominent, has been talking about drawing up a list of regulations to scrap. And there are some rather fine distinctions being made between protection of workers and burdensome regulation. I'd be interested to see where they draw the line between those two categories.
And of course, business has an interest in maintaining possibly regulation to access a European market.
Well, I think business has an interest in two things. One is predictability, which they've lost as far as I can see. And the second, as you say, is access to the market. But I think, to be perfectly honest, the politics suggest that we're going to end up leaving the market. Theresa May has said we will not be under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. And it seems to me that the notion that mere equivalence at the point of leaving will be enough to convince European regulators to give us untrammelled access in the future is a rather fanciful notion.
And how can regulators in that future still interact with European regulators?
Well, if we assume that actually whatever we do, we will not diverge that much from European standards, I suspect there will be a lot of traffic between here and European capitals, and that European regulators will continue to work together and share best practice. The only issue will be to what extent our politicians are going to start to try and change the regulatory framework in this country unilaterally once we're out. At the moment, I suspect that actually much will stay the same, simply because the workload of Brexit is so great that our government is not going to have time to do much by the way of re-regulation in other areas, because all their attentions will be focused on the Brexit process.
And do you think EU member states will be interested in maintaining the UK in joint databases, information exchange systems and such like?
I think they'd like to cooperate as much as possible, but without breaching core principles that they've laid out quite clearly. That is to say, when it comes to the market, you accept all the freedoms or none. Those sort of baselines are not going to move. But yeah, I think they'll be cooperative. This isn't, as some people are suggesting, a question of punishment. This is a question of doing as much together as we can whilst preserving the integrity of the EU's rules for those that remain members.
Anand, thank you very much.
My pleasure.